Right, so this morning we had Keir Starmer at 8:30 in the morning as everyone is travelling to work. What's he doing? He's got a press conference. He's making a statement on the Southport attackers. So I thought that we would roll through his statement, we'd pause it, we'd make some comments, and yeah, see what's Keir Starmer saying. So let's bring it up. I mean, just before we start, why is he even having to make this statement in the first place? Why is he having to make the statement? He's having to make the statement because it looks like he's been found out. But let's listen and we'll stop at the correct points. We'll dissect what he's saying and we'll go for there.
The senseless, barbaric murder of 3 young girls in Southport is a devastating moment in our history. No words come anywhere close to expressing the brutality and horror in this case. Every parent in Britain will have had the same thought. It could have been anywhere. It could have been our children. But it was Southport. It was Bibi, 6 years old. Elsie, 7. Alice, 9. Back in August, I said there would be a time for questions, but that first justice had to be done, and that above all, we must not interfere with the work of the police, the prosecutors, and the delivery of that justice. Well, yesterday, thankfully, a measure of justice was done, but it won't bring those girls back to their families, and it won't remove the trauma from the lives of those who were injured. Their lives will never be the same.
He's got that right.
So before I turn to the questions that must now be answered for the families and the nation, I first want to recognize their unimaginable grief, because I know the whole country grieves for them. The tragedy of the Southport killings must be a line in the sand for Britain. We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. In pursuit of that, we must, of course, ask and answer difficult questions, questions that should be far-reaching, unburdened by cultural or institutional sensitivities.
So, I mean, where's he getting this attitude from? You know what I mean? Trump's in office one day, and the next day, Keir Starmer's up making a statement, pretending to be a leader, pretending to emulate Trump. We know we mustn't allow cultural differences to stop this investigation.
And driven only by the pursuit of justice.
Yeah, of course.
That is what we owe the families. The responsibility for this barbaric act lies, as it always does, with the vile individual who carried it out. But that
it's not entirely true in this case.
It is no comfort. And more importantly, it is no excuse. And so, as part of the inquiry launched by the Home Secretary yesterday, I will not let any institution of the state deflect from their failure. Failure which, in this case, frankly, leaps off the page. For example, the perpetrator was referred to the PREVENT programme on 3 separate occasions. In 2019, once, and in 2021, twice. Yet on each of these occasions, a judgment was made that he did not meet the threshold for intervention, a judgment that was clearly wrong.
So it's dumbfounding to think that this killer has been referred to the Prevent programme. And what use is it if you refer someone 3 times and they get kicked back 3 times in the trot? 3 times on the trot, they get kicked back. Actually, you don't meet the requirements of a terrorist. Sorry. Try again next time.
And which failed those families. And I acknowledge that here today. Throughout this case, to this point, we have only been focused on justice. If this trial had collapsed because I or anyone else had revealed crucial details while the police were investigating, while the case was being built, while we were awaiting a verdict, then the vile individual who committed these crimes would have walked away a free man.
I mean, this is just absolute lies here. As if he's going to walk away having killed 3 young girls. He's going to walk away if Keir Starmer reveals that he's actually a terrorist with an Al-Qaeda manual, the son of someone involved in the Rwandan genocide. Or if these details had been emerged, or he would have walked free. What a lot of codswallop, what a lot of nonsense.
The prospect of justice destroyed for the victims and their families.
No.
I would never do that.
No.
And nobody would ever forgive me if I had. That is why the law of this country forbade me or anyone else from disclosing details sooner.
This is the thing, like, the trial was yesterday. Court hearing was yesterday. We heard, a month ago that he had an Al-Qaeda manual. That should have prejudiced the court case. How come that didn't happen? No, I don't believe you, Keir.
Nonetheless, it is now time for those questions. And the first of those is whether this was a terrorist attack. The blunt truth here is that this case is a sign. Britain now faces a new threat. Terrorism has changed. In the past, the predominant threat was highly organized groups with clear political intent, groups like Al-Qaeda.
Right, groups like Al-Qaeda. How is this any different? He's just mentioned Al-Qaeda. The guy had an Al-Qaeda manual. How is this now different?
Threat, of course, remains. But now, alongside that, we also see acts of extreme violence perpetrated by loners, misfits, young men in their bedroom, accessing all manner of material online, desperate for notoriety, sometimes inspired by traditional terrorist groups, but fixated on that extreme violence, seemingly for its own sake. Now, it may well be that people like this are harder to spot, but we can't shrug our shoulders and accept that.
Wasn't he very hard to spot? He was referred to Prevent by at 3 separate occasions. His dad had to stop him getting in a taxi to go and attack a school. So how is this hard to spot?
Have a national security system that fails to tackle people who are a danger to our values, our security, our children. We have to be ready to face every threat. And when I look through the details of this case, the extreme nature of the violence, the meticulous plan to attack young children in a place of joy and safety, violence clearly intended to terrorize, then I understand why people wonder what the word terrorism means.
We're getting a lecture
And
here.
so if the law needs to change to recognise this new and dangerous threat, then we will change it, and quickly.
And here we go. Let's bring in new laws, new censorship laws. Here we go.
And we will also review our entire counter-extremist system to make sure we have what we need to defeat it. Now, that work is already underway. I've tasked Sir David Anderson Casey, the new independent Prevent Commissioner, to hold this system to account, to shine a light into its darkest corners, so the British people can have confidence that action will follow words.
So we get a grooming gang inquiry. Nothing to see here. Pass it on. I knew we we're going to get an inquiry about the Southport thing. Yep, nothing to see here. Pass it on. It's the same old rhetoric. We'll leave no stone unturned. We'll shine a torch in the deepest recesses, all the corners, and find out what happened. It's such BS.
But I have to say, to face up to this new threat, there are also bigger questions. Questions such as how we protect our children from the tidal wave of violence freely available online. Because you can't tell me that the material this individual viewed before committing these murders should be accessible on mainstream social media platforms, that with just a few clicks, people can watch video after horrific video, videos that in some cases are never taken down.
See, I mean, this thing, he's intertwining real life problems. I mean, he's not entirely wrong here. It's not entirely wrong. How do we shield kids from the social media contagion? Well, how about we push the fact that you don't need a phone to operate in today's society. You don't need a smartphone. You don't need to be shackled to a screen wherever you go, wherever you walk. Where is this? Where's the banning phones in schools, Keir? If you're really concerned, let's get to the nitty-gritty. We all know about the problems with violence in our schools, violent videos. And yet, nobody wants to take phones out of schools.
No, that cannot be right. But it's not just the nightmares of the online world. Because when you wake from a nightmare, the first thing you do is reassure yourself with reality. But for far too many people, the state of our society no longer does that. Now, people will say this is all because of immigration or all because of funding cuts.
No, I don't think anybody's saying it's about funding cuts, Keir. I don't think anybody's saying that.
But in truth, neither tells us anything like the full story or explains this case properly. No, this goes deeper. A growing sense that the rights and responsibilities that we owe to one another, the set of unwritten rules that hold a nation together, have in recent years been ripped apart. Children who've stopped going to school since the pandemic. Young people who've opted out of work or education. More and more people retreating into parallel lives, whether through failures of integration or just a country slowly turning away from itself.
So, I mean, he wants to reinforce that we're communities dissolving. It's the advent of digital media, this digital cage that we're being put in. He wants to talk about the social contract that we have with other people. How about the social contract that the government has with us? How about that? Doesn't he want to talk about that?
Wounds that politics, for all that it may have contributed, must try to heal. Thirdly, there are also questions about the accountability of the Whitehall and Westminster system. a system that is far too often driven by circling the institutional wagons, that does not react until justice is either hard won by campaigners or until appalling tragedies like this finally spur a degree of action. Time and again, we see this pattern. And people are right to be angry about it. I'm angry about it. Southport must be a line in the sand. But nothing will be off the table in this inquiry. Nothing.
Of course it won't.
And most importantly, it will lead to change. I know people will be watching right now, and they'll be saying, we've heard all this before, the promises, the sorrow, the inquiry that comes and goes, an inability to change that, frankly, has become the oxygen of wider conspiracy.
Well, I don't even know what to say about this. I mean, he's absolutely right. We've seen it all happen before, inquiry after inquiry. I mean, this is the thing with his speech today. I was agreeing with him on some points. Of course, I was agreeing with him on some points. You know what I mean? It's such a strange speech. And it's strange why he feels compelled to do it. Very strange indeed. What he's doing here, he's covering up for his own failures, the failures of his government. That's what he's doing. And there's no other way. I mean, we're getting to the juicy bits of it, which is the questions. But we'll get to that when we get to it. We're just going to motor on.
And we've seen that throughout this case. A suggestion that there has been a cover-up. I want to put on record that yesterday's guilty verdict only happened because hundreds, if not thousands, of dedicated public servants worked towards it, many of whom endured absolutely harrowing circumstances, particularly in the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. That is their job. They are brilliant at it, but we should never forget their service to our country. Law and order depend on them. And yet I'm under no illusions that until the wider state shows the country it can change, not just what it delivers for people, but also its culture, then this atmosphere of mistrust will remain. So I want to be crystal clear in front of the British people today. We will leave no stone unturned.
Here we go.
I was the prosecutor who first spotted failures in grooming cases in my institution, the CPA.
I can't believe he's actually going to give himself a pat on the back here. He's going to give himself a pat on the back when it comes to the grooming gangs. Are you serious here? I was the guy that allowed it to happen.
Yes, 14 years ago. And I was the prosecutor who first did something about it by bringing the rape gangs in Rochdale to justice. And so my approach as Prime Minister will be no different. If any shortcomings are now holding back the ability of this country to keep its citizens and its children safe, I will find them and I will root them out. Because when it comes to justice, the failure to be transparent is not only disgraceful on its own terms, it is also the enemy of strong communities. It spreads suspicion more widely and allows division to win.
Well, see, he's talking about transparency here, and yet they all kept it from us. This, yes, of course, this was an Islamist Muslim terror attack. He had the Al-Qaeda manual. And then leapt to label people far right for coming out and protest against it. So he's got no right to talk about transparency. He's got no right to talk about this.
I remember when this happened, in those dark days of the summer. And I remember that, like now, the whole country grieved for Southport. But I also remember how it was profoundly moved by their example. Because even as that community faced an unimaginable evil, even as they had to endure mindless violence, bricks and bottles thrown at their community, their businesses, their mosque, police officers attacked, including those who are on the scene responding to this vile murder. Even despite all of that, they chose to come together. They chose to pick up the pieces of their lives. They chose to rebuild, brick by brick, side by side. Strangers no longer strangers, a community. This country has no shortage of empathy for the people of Southport. I know that. But in the face of such darkness and tragedy, what we really should do is follow their example. That is what we need to face this new threat. But also something more. Because national renewal isn't just about public services or the economy. It's about turning us back towards ourselves, giving people confidence in a shared future, so people can once again see the strength and power in themselves and in this nation.
This is a problem in the speech as well. He's turning this tragedy into a political speech about Labour. He's trying to bolster his own popularity. He's trying to bolster the popularity of the Labour Party by making a statement about Southport, in which he's being accused of a cover-up. Come on, he knew. We'll find out later on in the video that he knew it was a Muslim terror attack. The guy had an Al-Qaeda manual, and yet he was jailing people who called it as it was, a Muslim terror attack. The guy's a psychopath.
But that can only begin today by holding up the mirror and facing what we see. So wherever this inquiry goes, we will follow it. No matter the boats it will rock, no matter the vested interests it will threaten, we won't hide. But then, most importantly of all, we will act. Because this time it will be different. Southport will be a line in the sand. We will honour those 3 little girls and deliver not just justice, but the change that the people and families of Southport deserve. Thank you. I will now take a number of questions from the media, starting with Vicky Young.
So tell me what you thought about the statement. Did you hear it this morning? Did you hear it just now? Is this you first getting a hold of it? What do you make of it? It's hard not to agree at points, but then the speech is designed like that. Now, let's get into the questions.
Young from the BBC.
Prime Minister, you are a person with years of experience as a senior prosecutor. Do you really need a public inquiry to tell you that the system needs to change? And isn't there the possibility that that delay could mean that other dangerous cases are missed in the meantime?
I think we need a public inquiry to answer all of the questions that the families, the people of Southport and the country have about this case, and to ensure that no stone is unturned, that every failure is exposed.
Here we go, okay? No stones unturned, every failure is exposed. Why do we actually need a public inquiry? The guy's right. The reason a public inquiry is getting called is because, there's so much wrong with this. They knew he was a terrorist threat and yet did nothing.
And dealt with. I also think we need an inquiry because we are dealing with a new cohort.
No. It's not new. It's the same old terrorism with the same old face, with the same old Al-Qaeda manual. It's not a new form of terrorism. No matter what Keir Starmer tries to paint it as, tries to make it a new form of terrorism, is it hell?
Different threat, this individualized extreme violence, and we have to have the laws and framework in place to deal with it. But I accept your challenge. We shouldn't wait until the end of the inquiry before we start the change. And that's why already there's been a review of what happened with Prevent and the findings and learnings from that, so that the mistakes that were made then would not be made today. That is really important in reassuring the public. Why we've appointed a commissioner to look into that whole part of the apparatus, and why we will get on with some of the work we need to get on with changing, for example, the law when it comes to the framework for dealing with extreme violence. So we do need the inquiry so we have the full picture, full accountability, and every single question that the families have is properly answered in the proper way. But we need to get on with the change in the meantime, and to reassure the public that every step is being taken to protect their children. Thank you. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Beth Rigby, Sky News, thank you. Prime Minister, it now emerges the perpetrator was known to the authorities and had been referred to Prevent, the anti-terrorism programme, 3 times. He'd had contact with the police, the courts, the justice, the youth system and mental health services. It's a catastrophic failure of the state to protect those young girls. Do you acknowledge that if that information had come out when the riots were happening, it would have provoked further outrage by the public? So you withheld information. Is that true? And do you acknowledge that...
You see what Beth Rigby's doing here? Are you serious? You see what she's doing here? You know, I mean, is this actually a question? Or, you know, is it true, Keir Starmer, that if the full details of this story emerged, that there would have been even more fury, even more anger? So isn't it true, Keir Starmer, that you held back the tide of hatred? Isn't it true that you actually, you lessened the damage? What a terrible, terrible question this is. It's the biggest layup you'll ever find. And this is what we get for the media class here in Britain. Absolute layup questions. She's actually complimenting them and giving them the route to the answer while she's questioning them. What a farce.
Whatever happens now, whatever public inquiry you carry out, this will hugely undermine trust from the public in the authorities and your government. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Let me be clear. Responsibility for the disorder and the violence lies with those that perpetrated it. We need to be really clear about that. But let me...
So people are not even allowed to get angry anymore. You know, I mean, at what point do people riot? At what stage of this societal decline is it now then appropriate to riot? At what stage? When your daughters are being murdered at a dance class. That's not the stage.
Just the facts as you put them to me. There has been a failure here, and I don't intend to let any institution of the state deflect from their failures, and I acknowledge that readily here. Yes, I knew the details as they were emerging. That is the usual practice in a case such as this. But you know, and I know, that it would not have been right to disclose those details. The only losers, if the details had been disclosed, would be the victims and the families, because it ran the risk.
It's total BS. Total BS. The public deserved to know the truth immediately. The public deserved to know the truth immediately, and they're hiding behind this cloak of obscurity. It's not right.
The trial would collapse. I'm never going to do that. Never going to do that, because they deserve that justice. And only by having the rules in place can that justice be delivered, as a measure of it now has. And I wouldn't be forgiven if I had. Those are not just my choices, though it is a choice I would make. It is also the law of the land. That is why I couldn't disclose the details. It's why others couldn't disclose the details. It's why all of you as journalists couldn't disclose the details, because the same laws applied to you just as they applied to me. And it's really important that we make that clear. But the purpose of the rule is to protect the justice that the families and the victims are entitled
See,
to.
I just don't think it's going to affect the justice at all. What difference would it have made if the killer had been known to prevent? He had been he had been failed. The state failed in every single aspect of alerting, of stopping this happening. He was referred to prevent 3 times. The school knew he was an issue. The teachers knew he was an issue. The police knew he was an issue. Social services knew he was an issue. And yet, because we know all this, this is somehow going to prejudice the case. The fact that he's got an Al Qaeda manual and he was producing ricin, this is somehow going to affect the case. I just don't believe it.
So I think that's the right thing. It is now right, having got to this stage, that the questions are asked and the answers are given, which is why we've taken the course of an inquiry, but also why between now and the conclusion of the inquiry, we will happily answer any questions that are put to us. But that is why, notwithstanding that, yes, I was being kept updated, of course, I did not disclose anything that would collapse the trial and defeat justice in this case. And I don't think anybody could ever have looked the victims and their families in the eye if they'd ever done that.
What could they have possibly said that would have collapsed the case? It doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Beth. Can I have Paul Brand, please, from ITV?
Paul Brand from ITV. Thank you, Prime Minister. All of us, as you say, as journalists, understand the risk of contempt of court, prejudicing a trial. But we live in a different age now, don't we, where misinformation and disinformation spreads at lightning speed online. I was in Southport on the day of the attacks. There was a short window in which information could have been released before charge, before any risk of prejudicing a trial. Why didn't you do that? And do you think it was a mistake not to provide that detail then?
Firstly, let me address...
This is the thing. The guy's right. We live in a different age where information is at our fingertips. It's everywhere. And of course, all these things were happening when these rumours were circulating right after the Southport. The rumours that turned out to be true, by the way, that he was an Islamist, that he did have the Al Qaeda manual, that this was a terrorist incident and he was a Muslim, that all these unfounded rumours turned out to be true. He could have then come out and said something just to try to settle the situation, but didn't.
Part of your look, it is true that we live in a different age in that available information is now available online as well as offline, and I understand the frustration of all, but including some journalists who observe the rules and don't report what they know because they know that the law doesn't permit it and it runs the risk of collapsing a trial, only to see information online that doesn't appear to be following the same rules. And that is not acceptable. That has to be addressed and will be part of what we will be looking at, because that can't be right. But in relation to the central thrust of your question, the importance of the rule about not disclosing this information is to ensure that the trial can take place and that where an individual is guilty, they're held to account, as has now happened in this case. And that is why the law carefully restricts what can be said by anyone, not just me as Prime Minister, but anybody in these circumstances. And it is done to protect the family and their victims. That is the right thing. And that is what the law requires. It's also the choice I would make to ensure that my first thoughts are about justice for the victims and their families. That, for me, is first and foremost. Yes, we can answer questions, and we are now doing so with this inquiry and everything that will happen before the end of that inquiry. That is quite right. But it is also right that the families who've been through unimaginable grief at least have the comfort now of an outcome in this particular case. And you would be putting very different questions to me if I had disclosed information and we were now faced with a decision that the trial had just collapsed and the families would never get justice.
As if the trial could collapse of a multiple murder of children. And what? As if that is that could be possible.
You would rightly be challenging me very, very hard about why I had disclosed information. Thank you very much, Paul. Chris from GB News.
Chris Hope, GB News. Prime Minister, given what we know now about the terror link and how it's kept from the public, do you now regret blaming the far right for all those protests last summer? Was it a far right issue, or were some people entitled to be concerned and upset? Not the rioters.
Excellent question. Let's just watch it back.
From GB News.
Chris Hope, GB News. Prime Minister, given what we know now about the terror link and how it's kept from the public, do you now regret blaming the far right for all those protests last summer? Was it a far right issue, or were some people entitled to be concerned and upset? Not the rioters.
The thing is, it's not as if he blamed the far right. He labelled everyday, ordinary people far right for being angry about this. Wasn't it he blamed the far right for it? No, he labelled ordinary individuals, ordinary citizens far right because they were angry about what happened. And not only were they angry, they were absolutely correct. Their assumptions were correct. So, is Keir Starmer angry? Is he ashamed of the fact that he called everyone far right? Let's see what his answer is.
Responsibility for the violence lies with them that perpetrated it. I was in Southport the day after these terrible murders. I was acknowledging and thanking the frontline police officers and ambulance who had been at the scene. You can imagine what they had been through. They were back at work the next day. They were saying it was just their job. I could see in their eyes.
See, what has this got to do with that actual question? Again, it's typical politician answer.
It had had on them, what they had to deal with, what they had to see, how they endured that. As I arrived back in London, those same officers were putting their riot gear on and having bricks thrown at them. Those same officers.
See, this is the thing. He always goes back to it's the same officers that went to the incident and tried to save those girls and had to deal with seeing something that you can't unsee. They were the ones who had to put on the riot gear. Always that. You know what I mean? This is the main fact. This is the main point that they always make. That the police, that everyone actually, of course, we supported them in going into the situation. They don't deserve bricks being thrown at them, but this is why they keep going back to it as if it is the main aspect of it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's the same people, really. It's the police in general.
I don't think anybody can justify that, nor should they attempt to do so. Thank you, Chris.
So we didn't even get an answer there. This is the thing with Keir Starmer. Absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal. He can't face up to his own failings. In fact, there's still people rotting in jail. There's still people doing large sentences for saying things on social media. Things that actually transpire to be absolutely correct and spot on. So what's the problem? And you notice that all the questions he can't answer, it's that one. The most pertinent question. The question that's on the tip of everyone's tongue. Can he answer it? Well, guys, that's been the Keir Starmer press conference, the statement. Tell me in the comments, why has he made this statement in the first place? Why is he doing it now? To me, it looks like it's self-preservation. He's trying to bolster, he's trying to use this tragedy and the mistakes surrounding the tragedy for his own benefit, for his own political capital. He's trying to benefit Labour and benefit himself using this tragedy. Another waste. You know, it's shameless. Absolutely shameless. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching the Niall Fraser Show.